Hi, I'm Heinbach. It's good to have you back. One thing that I get asked very often is, what are places to visit in Berlin if you're interested in sound? And in this video, I'm going to take you to a very special, not very well-known place, an archive of dead media that is right next to Angela Merkel's townhouse.
Yep. My name is Stefan Höltgen. I'm assistant to Professor Wolfgang Ernst at the Department for Media Science here at Humboldt-University. And we are here at the Media Archaeological Fundus. And this collection is meant as a hands-on collection for students and researchers in media science. Most of these artifacts here are dysfunctional, so you can't run them in the proper way they are meant for, but you can learn from them, from their structures, by opening them, how they did work when they worked back in the day. The idea here is to confront a kind of chronological or logical kind of media history with the artifacts themselves. So to say, a chronology of record players, where the record player has been invented as a kind of gramophone, and goes on and goes on and on and on, and it gets better and better and better and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And this is the logic of economies. But then from time to time you can find objects and gadgets that react to this kind of historical writing, since they are way better, or they introduce very new features, or they make a step back in history. So we think you can't do media historiography by just looking at the markets. You have to look at the gadgets and the tools themselves. Most of them is about sound, since we are a department for sound studies and media science. So you can find synthesizers and record players and many tools that are sonic, where everything is hands-on and everything is meant to experiment. Even the somehow expensive things like this one here. This is an early prototype of Friedrich Kittler's analog synthesizer he built in the early 1980s. And even these things here, the breadboards, are hands-on to analyze them and to get an idea from them. The financial worth is very low, but the epistemological worth is very high.
The information usually is pretty scarce on these things oftentimes. So, for example, on that recorder, I found one page. Mm-hmm. That's all. This is like a piece of technology that completely went nowhere. Dead ends of media history.
And these dead ends are the interesting points I spoke of when it comes to media historiography. To look at the questions, why was this a dead end? Or why was this Telefunken picture disc thing a dead end, where the video is recorded on a flexi disc like a record from a record player. Mm-hmm. And they put that to market in 1978, just before the Laserdisc came, and so they didn't sell it. So here you can put scratches on it and get the image of scratches, where before you could hear scratches on your record, here you can see them.
I wonder how that looks.
It's a kind of jump cuts in the narrow sense you can get if you put your needle on such a scratch. This one here is a student project. It's an early analog computer. The idea came from this book, The Korsakoff Machine, where Korsakoff built a machine to mix homeopathic pills and things like that. And so the students came to the idea to reenact this thing to mix cocktails. It's a cocktail mix analog computer.
60. Ja, jetzt sind sie weg.
Yeah. These stripes are a part of information theory from Claude Shannon, who made the sampling theory and said you have to use at least twice the double frequency to sample a signal. This depends on the frequency of the camera, which differs too much from the frequency of the lights, and so you get a third frequency which isn't there, but which you can see or hear. This is one thing you can do down here with experiments. There is a student-built sine generator. There you can experiment with different frequencies to make sine curves to draw them on the wall, and experiment with overlaying frequencies. The error is much more interesting to us than the proper working of a tool. Since the tool opens itself, epistemologically spoken, if it comes to an error. Epistemology tries to find out how knowledge and how ideas and how information is transformed by media technology. Not the technological theory, but the philosophical theory of formats, where we can ask, why didn't the cinema invent movies to smell? So epistemology is a theory of knowledge. We start with the phonograph and we end with Heidegger. Sometimes it works, and I think it starts there and goes there. So at first you have to put some energy into the system, and then we have a kind of physically amplifying process with this speaker here, which resembles the contents of your own ear, which collects, and this is why it's called a phonograph, not only a phonoplayer, since you could speak into it and put the frequency as a kind of vibration to the needle and write on this. But one even more interesting thing is this tiny tool here. This so-called governor. This is a cybernetic tool, which controls the speed of the rotation. If it's too fast, then the governor takes energy out of the system, so it gets slower. And if it's too slow, then the governor slows down and it gets faster. This stems from steam engines, steam engine technology, where you wanted to get every time the same amount of power from the steam engine and not much power at the beginning and no power at the end. So this is a cybernetical tool, since it builds in a feedback process between the record player or the phonograph player and the kind of motor or the energy I put in. There's some energy in that. Back here. Then at one point it saves the speed, the proper speed of the record player. So now the energy is off. Another thing I oftenly show to visitors is our world's smallest portable record player, sponsored by VW. It's a famous German car manufacturer and ecological catastrophic producer. And with this one is a record player where the needle is put under the car, and there's a little battery in and an amplifier, an electronic amplifier. Now we can drive. I think this is the right.
Entfaltet sich erst aus den Wolken von Orten einer Gegend. Die Kunst als Plastik, keine Besitzergreifung des Raumes.
Take this with you to the record store to hear into records.
You're gonna get kicked out because there's a record destroyer.
You will be put on this vehicle and
that tiny Doppler effect that comes from
like a siren from the past. Magnetic tapes, audio tapes, were much more expensive than producing records. The guy who did this content for the record is one of our professors, Horst Völz. Had a famous radio show in the 1980s where the people could learn programming on their home computers while listening to the radio. And at the end of the radio show, the data and the program source codes had been transmitted via radio, hearable. It's a kind of screeching noise. And sometimes the people were too far away, or there were too much noise in the channel, so the computers couldn't understand the signals. So they got the idea to make a record of that, and you can play like that. The main source of computer music in the 1950s, as you probably know, when they put speakers to their data buses to hear if the computer has hung up, and if it has hung up, then it is in a kind of infinitive loop, and you could hear that as a rhythm. So when the programmer heard a rhythm, then they knew, okay, cool sound, but the computer hangs. The computer just crashed.
Yeah.
And in the 50s, the hackers of MIT came to the idea to use this audio output to play music with it. They programmed codes and algorithms that are totally nonsense. Just if you put an audio equipment to the computer, then you can hear it, and then you can get the idea of the algorithm, which is meant to produce computer music. With your visuals, you can see optical structures, but you can't hear like temporal structures, of course, since your eyes can't recognize temporal structures, but your ears can.
That's it for part 1 of this video. In the second part, we'll be looking at the Signallabor, curated by Dr. Höltgen. There we will be checking out beautiful vintage computers and play a game of Pong on the Telefunken analog computer. The Media Archaeological Fundus is open to researchers, students, and to interested people. I guess that's you. And you can check the opening times on their website. A big thank you for everybody who supports what I do on Patreon. You are the reason I can keep on making these videos. So that's it for this one. If you have any questions, do leave in the comments below or visit the subreddit. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be seeing you in the next one. Bye.
This is a theremin called terziton, a musical instrument for dancing, not just. This works like a capacitor. This is one, and this is the other part of the capacitor. And if I move my body within the electromagnetic field of the capacitor, then the field changes. And we put a Raspberry Pi and the Arduino computer to it to change the tone systems. So we have a Greek tone system, a Western tone system, and things like that. And even the light bulbs are from the originality of the theremin to get a audio-visual show.